Prison guards of Reddit, what is the most extreme thing you ever saw happen in your prison? My dad was a prison guard in Tennessee. Every Thursday was pork chop day in Maximum. When you have nothing you live for the little things. One day they ran out of pork chops and a dump sheet guard tells the back of the line they're all out of pork chops, the rest of you duckers are getting bologna. Minor riot with a 6-hour lockdown, 2 broken bones, and like 10 people had to be treated by the nurse. Not me, but my mom is a prison nurse. She once had a dude swallow a balloon filled with drugs, and it popped or leaked in his stomach and he overdosed. Between fights, suicides, attempted suicides, etc. Worst one that got me was I cut down a hanger. He went into fight mode swinging at us. We got him to the ground and handcuffed him and pinned him on the floor. He started to cry, begging us to kill him as we tried to keep him from banging his head on the floor. That was my first hanging and stuck with me ever since. Edit. Since people are mentioning how depressing this thread is, I gotcha. I was working a pod and had someone throw a melted down shoe heel in a sofa can at me. Think hot melted rubber. It mainly got on my shirt, so I was fine, but started fighting with the guy. I had him pinned on the ground with 64 offenders around me. I had lost my cuffs in the fight, they had fell out away from me. Another offender I had known for a while assisted me, handing me my cuffs and holding the guy's legs down. I was able to drag that one offender out due to the fact the offenders on the pod were throwing stuff at us. The offender who helped me got his time reduced, and I wrote him a letter for the parole board and spoke on his behalf. He got out, works a good woodworking job $24 an hour, and writes to the prison with updates on how he is doing. He has a girlfriend and a baby on the way. Happiest story I have of that place. I did a bit in Florida about 4 years ago. While I was inside, they let my cell block come into the common area to watch the iHeart Radio Awards. Never would have watched it on my own, but it was nice to have the distraction. This was the summer that Ariana Grande had that One Less Problem song, and she performed it right before JLo came to the stage. Now, I'm in with mostly Puerto Rican inmates, so JLo being on was a big goddamn deal. Some dude just loses his shit during the Ariana Grande song. Some of the dudes said he was into little girls or something. And throws a very lightweight plastic chair at the TV. Didn't think it would do much damage, but it busted the LCD. Hell. Broke. Loose. Dudes weren't gonna get a chance to siege Los ass, and they wanted blood for it. I ran my gringo behind back to my cell, and a 60-man brawl ensued. All of this to say, in the midst of the insanity, one guy bit another guy's thumb off and swallowed it. With all the serious ones, I thought I would give a funny one too. Worked in a youth correctional facility. The units were Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, etc. On Charlie dorm there were 3 openly homosexual youth who were way over the top. When it came to stereotypical gay behavior, talked in lisps, used red Kool-Aid powder to make lipstick, tied their sweater arms together to make a purse, etc. Well, one day they are walking down the hall together, see me in my office, and said, "Hey act each, check this out." Then the 3 of them dropped and did the Charles Angels pose. I laughed my ass off. Not a co, but no maintenance staff. One inmate had a court date so left for the day. Apparently during his day out he managed to acquire a loose screw. Not big or anything. Apparently he found it on the floor of the transport van. Anyway, once back in his cell he decides to use the screw to drill a hole in the plexiglass window of his door. Mind you, the doors are a layer of plexiglass and then steel grating. Anyway, he drills 2 holes, one at the top and one at the bottom of about a 2 feet tall window. He does this between co-patrols who are supposed to do a walk around every 15 minutes. The inmate then proceeds to tear his bedding and ravel it into a string, which he feeds through the upper hole and back down through the lower hole. Using the friction of the bedding, he literally saws a giant hole in the plexiglass using nothing but his bedding. When questioned, he informed the guards that this took him roughly 11 hours to accomplish without a single co noticing it. He didn't escape. Like I said, there is still the steel grating. He literally just did this as a duck you to the guards, and he had the spare time. I have a family member who worked as staff, not a guard, at a state prison in California. Their job required them to work inside the prison. This was in 2010. There was another staffer who worked there. We'll call her Samantha. Samantha was an attractive 30-year-old who was happily married and had 2 kids. She was generally well liked and nobody thought her behavior was strange or different. One day the prison started having a major issue with cell phones being smuggled in. Lots of cell phones. The prison launched a huge investigation complete with shakedown, squeezing troublemaker inmates, the whole 9 yards. In one of the sweeps they found a love note between one of the inmates and Samantha. For anybody who doesn't know, prison guards and staff are absolutely prohibited from any sex with inmates. It's a serious crime that is prosecuted on a frighteningly regular basis. Turns out Samantha was not only having a sexual relationship with the inmate who had the letter, but she was having sex with 6 other inmates. So, she was ducking and exchanging long love letters with a total of 7 inmates simultaneously. One of the inmates had convinced her to smuggle in cell phones through the dry cleaning inmate work program. They estimate she smuggled in at least 50 phones this way. One of the other inmates she was involved with had been having his drug dealing proceeds from the street deposited into her personal savings account on the outside, so they had money to run away together. When the inmate got out, the inmate was serving a 17-year prison term. When this was discovered, there was major fallout for the staff and inmates at the prison. Security was tightened considerably, the dry cleaning work program was suspended, and Samantha was arrested and eventually sentenced to just over 3 years in prison. The craziest thing about the whole situation? Samantha's husband stayed with her. She got out of prison several years ago, and they are a seemingly happy family once again. My husband is a guard. I'm not going to be able to tell this as well as he could, but you'll get the point. He was doing count one night and there was an inmate that was bleeding, so they went in to see what was happening. The inmate had bitten the inside of his wrist and forearm and pulled the skin off down to the muscle and tendons. He was also chewing on something, and when he was told to spit it out he did, and it was a chunk of his flesh. He then immediately ripped off another piece with his teeth, and according to my husband slapped it up like spaghetti. They rushed him to medical, and he ended up having to be in the psych building clearly after he recovered. Edit. Spelling. Via my father, one prisoner was trying to kill his cellmate, but didn't have a weapon. So he took a pen, stuck it in the guy's ear, and stomped on it. It came out of the victim's mouth. An inmate with mental issues and HIV sliced his stomach open with a razor. Line was from below sternum to just below belly button. Survived, but man it was ugly. I used to be a corrections officer. I found an inmate beaten up and his neck snapped in the gym one night. Gave him CPR until medics arrived, but he was too far gone. My dad was in prison and the craziest day he experienced was sometime around the end of his first week in. He had been keeping his head down, but one of the other inmates told him to meet him outside by the corner of one of the building during their free time outside. He was hesitant because he didn't want to get into trouble right out of the gate. He looked toward the corner of the building and saw a small group of guys huddled, and he got even more concerned. Just as he was going to walk away they noticed him and called him over. He accepted. These guys were passing around a cantaloupe and sharing it. Each guy had a spoon and they'd take a bite and pass it on. Former psychologist at a youth detention facility. Some kids put little ball things in their penises with the belief that if they do the deed it will be more pleasurable for the girl. They get these things from the ball of a wine stopper, the spill-proof stuff. Picture a spherical thingy less than a penny. Apparently they had operated on each other. They melted their toothbrush to make a pseudo-surgical knife and made a small incision on their decks to insert these round things. They then sewn the wound closed with conventional needle and thread. We staff came to know when some kids are getting feverish all of a sudden we have to line them all up in the courtyard and let them drop their pants so that our nurse could check them so that we could remove these bolitis. The term for these is to prevent an epidemic. These kids are aged 15 to 18 and there are not any girls around to fool around. Conjugal visits are also not allowed. Like, come on kids. I was working in the X house. My prison had 3 areas: general population, STC for somewhat mentally unstable I/MS, and the X house, shaped like an X, for seriously mentally ill guys that would throw poop, cut themselves, etc. I was on the seg wing. Even though most cells in the X house were like Zeg anyway, this area had another officer to watch it specifically. So I was called over to watch a guy who had been placed on continuous suicide watch. He was completely naked with nothing else in his cell, and I have to stand just outside the door and watch him. So Hes trying to do everything to get a reaction out of me, but him on a face Phillips, documenting every 5 minutes what Hes doing. He climbs up on the bed, takes his dick in one hand and starts stroking. He takes a finger from his other hand and wets it in his mouth. The now wet finger goes behind him, right into his ass, and then he starts yelling my last name. We all have nama tags Awark 30, Awark 30, Awark 30. Then after Hes done doing that, he walks up to the door. These are steel doors with just a window for seeing into the cell. We're basically face to face with this window between us. Just below the window is a chuck hole, which is a tiny door for passing food trays through. Thankfully it was closed, because I look down at the chuck hole and see yellow liquid coming out from the sides of it. I took a few steps back and continued my watch. I wasn't gonna let him get a reaction out of me. I responded to a fight in the shower where an inmate pushed the other inmate over the bench in the middle of the showers, jumped on him, and bit off his chin. I picked his chin up and packed it in ice. I was also a trip officer that day, so I ended up escorting him to the hospital. On the way to the hospital the ambulance hit a deer. I also hit the deer at 78 miles per hour. It had bounced from the ambulance strike and ruptured in midair, exploding all over the front of the van. The van was damaged, but still drove. When we got to the hospital, the doctor didn't sanitize the piece of chin or anything, just sewed it back on. It didn't take, and a few weeks later the guy got gangrene, and his chin fell off. Then he almost died from infection. That was a hell of a day. Currently a co. I work in one of the reformed mental health facilities for my state. Basically we're a prison with a strong focus on mental health rehabilitation. We deal with some of the state's finest worst cases. I've seen a man with a literal hole in his body from his chest to below his belly button. He put it there. It started after he ripped his intestines out and bit through them. He then proceeded to enlarge the hole slowly over time. Longest 4-point restraint inmate in the state's history. Also seen a guy shove a 4-foot headphone extension cord through his DK and into his bladder not once, not twice, but 5 times now. Has also gouged his eye out. I've got stories like these for days. No, a prison guard, but I work in a psych hospital. Worst thing I saw was a man fingering his stoma in his stomach so hard it was bleeding. He was repeating "duck me" in the posse as he fingered it. Couldn't get that sheet out of my head for a few days. As I was trying to pull his hand out of his intestines he was looking deep into my eyes and begging me to duck it. That guy was a mess.